everyone. Welcome to In Time. My name is Nicholas Lamar Suter. Thank you for joining us. A couple of quick things that we need to do to get out of the way really quickly. First of all, unfortunately, Operator Starsky could not make it. He and I were talking earlier today, and he's just not available. So we knew this would happen as we got closer to the offensive, which I think we all know is coming, world's worst kept secret. So it's one of those things. He's just going to be less and less available. So it was very good to talk about, what he's busy. So we wish him the best, and we are sorry we couldn't bring him to you today. We're going to do our best to inform you as to what's going on and what we're expecting in the next few weeks in Ukraine. So we've got Commander Lance McMillan with us. Commander, thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So what we're going to do is, I wanted to do one other piece of business before we get to anything else, which is I wanted to ask everyone we're trying to get to, we got like 80 subs left on Overtime, so if everyone could join us on Overtime, go there, subscribe. It's pain in the neck, I know, but if we can hit that 80, it really changes, it revolutionizes everything for that channel. It makes it a lot easier to do the things that we wanted to get done. Just got a message from Xandering. Yes, sir, please come on in and join us. Xandering is free, so we should be getting him in a minute. Looking forward to that. So. But while we are waiting for Xandering, and while we're giving everyone a minute, the link to Overtime is up at the top of, it's pinned on In Time. You can also find it in the description on In Time. You can also find all of Starsky's social media info, Twitter, YouTube. Obviously, you all know who he is. You wouldn't be here, I think, if you didn't. So please make sure you're liked and subscribed to all of that. So having said that, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go see about Xandering and see what he's up to, and I will pass this off to Commander McMillan. I do know that I guess it was a record, I think it was 5 days ago, there was a record number of attacks on Kyiv, and so I was hoping you could fill us in on sort of what's going on and why the sudden uptick.
Sure. So right now, I think Russians are looking to do whatever they can to distract the Ukrainians and delay the start of the offensive. Every day gives them presumably more time to prepare, both in terms of digging entrenchments and putting in their magic concrete dragon's teeth to keep tanks out. Yeah, right. That's worked so well in the past. Yeah, but it gives them time, and that's one of the things they're doing. It also is their way of just continually nudging the Ukrainians, saying it's better for you to give in. The longer this continues, the more civilians are going to die in these barrages. So you need to come to your senses and end this madness. They don't really understand the reality, or maybe they do but don't care, probably the latter. But I think that's a lot of what's going on right now. And the other part of that, I think, is that there's been a lot of speculation that they're burning through their stocks of missiles and drones and such, and doing periodic massive volleys like this is kind of a way of saying, no, we've still got tons of stars of these weapons, and we're going to teach you a lesson. So don't think you're going to get off easy. So I think that's maybe part of what's going on.
So trying to project the illusion of the strength, and maybe they've got, I'm going to ask you about that, but trying to do more than you would expect someone who's trying to ration them. If they're really trying to ration their missiles, why would they do this? So they're trying to give a false sense of power, essentially, if I understand correctly.
In part. And the other part, as we've discussed before on the show many times, is that increasingly that's the only tool they have left in their toolbox. That and the card that they keep hidden in the envelope in the drawer and they never take out, but they threaten to take out all the time.
That card being
the nuclear card. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a lot of what's going on, and it just they're not. You'll notice that even the stupid attempts of manpower, human wave assaults to try to take Bakhmut, even those have kind of stopped, and they're waiting for the hammer to fall, I think, is what's going on right now, because they know the hammer's there. They know it's being lifted up for a big strike. They just don't know where that strike's going to hit.
And my understanding is the general assessment from everybody at this point is that Russia is no longer capable of any significant offensive combat operations. Is that correct?
I don't think that's an entirely accurate statement. I think one of the key issues is that the kind of offenses they would launch are ones that would be hideously costly. And maybe the general staff is finally coming to its senses and telling Vladimir, dude, we got to stop doing this. We need to husband our resources right now, because we're going to need to counterattack to stabilize the front when this thing happens. So let's not do any more stupid stuff. Let's husband this stuff. Let's try to get some more of our elite units reconstituted so we can use them as we can. But let's take that operational pause that we probably should have taken quite some time ago.
So let me, I have a couple other questions about logistics, a couple other things I want to ask. I do also want to pass this off to Xandering, who has joined us. But before I do, last question, major question. From what I'm understanding, the people of Ukraine have become increasingly aware that a lot of this stuff is coming from Iran. Iran is supplying a lot of drone technology at this point to Russia. That's my understanding.
and probably parts needed for building more of these missiles, because the sanctions of getting them into Russia make it really tough. But Iran, who also has been sanctioned for a long time, has already worked out all those circuitous backcountry routes to get stuff in for themselves. So now they're just sending that stuff straight on to their buddy.
So, to the best of your understanding, is there anything that the international community is planning on doing? Is there anything we really can do with regards to all of that and Iran? And secondly, what is is Ukraine planning on doing anything to or with Iran in this regards?
I don't know that there's much that Ukraine can do to Iran, because they don't have the reach for that kind of operation. They don't have the ability to project power overseas. They may ask for greater sanctions to be put in place against the Iranians. They may, stage one or two special operations attacks on key factories. But I don't think they have the capability to do anything significant to the Iranians. Oh, you've lost voice.
Yep, sorry. It was just one too many things going on. Xandering, thank you so much for joining us. How you doing? And got any questions you want to ask, or what are your thoughts on where we stand so far?
I guess I'm doing okay, hanging out in Ohio before going to New Jersey to load.
It's so rare we actually get you during a one of these Friday shows. This is your main loading and unloading days, or at least your unloading days. Is that right?
Yeah, oftentimes we'll end up, just because of the logistics of how long it takes to go across the country. If you load on a Monday and you're going to the East Coast, you're probably going to unload on a Friday or be on the way to an unload, dealing with lots of traffic. So yeah, Fridays in the middle of the day tend to, I don't know, they just always seem to fall on a loading or unloading, or right in the middle of those two things. So, but I can't load until Monday. We're having some problems logistically trying to find some reloads out in this area. So we were able to find one, but it can't load till Monday. So I'm spending the weekend out here.
All right. Well, so any thoughts on sort of where things stand, and any questions? Excuse me. Sorry. I really wish I could get this cough under control. Any questions on the last week of the war in general?
I guess my biggest thing is are we actually seeing any concrete preparations? I mean, I've been hearing, it's about to start for a long time, and I realize operational security, you don't want to put out there exactly the date you're moving, but I would imagine we've got a pretty good eye on things. And are things shaking out, or is things starting to move? Are the conditions good for moving?
Ground is starting to dry out. Maybe a week longer before it's really in perfect condition, but they could probably do something about now. We see a lot of what I would call establishing attacks and such, real small probe actions, reconnaissance. These the Russian partisans, for lack of a better word, are continuing to stage raids into Russia. By all accounts that are coming out from reasonably trustworthy sources, these attacks, like the one in Belgorod, which was a very big attack for these guys, I think it was a showcase to, tell the world stage, hey, we're here. But they're doing smaller ones, and it's really unsettled the people inside the Kremlin. They're moving significant security assets to that heretofore quiet border area. And they're really concerned because nothing makes an authoritarian oligarch more nervous than the thought of, maybe there really is an angry mob with torches and pitchforks headed this way. Maybe we should do something about that. So, yeah, it's doing what it intends to do, which is keep the Russians insecure about what's happening, where this is going to come, keeps them off their guard. All of that together is doing its job. You don't want to launch the attack too early. You want to set the right stages, put in place all the enabling functions and the probing actions so you find the perfect place to launch the attack. The one thing that the Ukrainians don't have that's an advantage over the Russians is manpower. We've talked about this many times, but basically Russia has more than 3 times the population that Ukraine has. And they can just keep whittling away at the Ukrainians and eventually grind them down. The equipment isn't so much of a problem, at least as long as the West's generosity holds and we keep giving them stuff or pursue the war. But yeah, the bodies, that isn't something we can provide. That's something that's got to come from themselves. So they have to figure out how to do their attacks very carefully. And generally speaking, you lose a significantly higher portion of your troops when you're attacking than you do when you're defending.
2 other curiosity questions that I've got I'm hoping you can shed some light on is,
sure.
One of them is the reported string of drone attacks in Moscow. What are your thoughts on those? Who's doing it? Why? I've heard so much speculation back and forth.
There's an enormous amount of speculation, and I really can't sort through it, so I can't tell you definitively what's going on. We do know that the Ukrainians have modified some of the drones they have to do longer range operations. So that may be part of it. It may be that they're smuggling these in and providing them to these anti-regime partisans who are launching them themselves from somewhere inside Russia. It could just be small homemade stuff. That's the wonder of the drone is, honestly, anybody can kind of build one at home in a lot of ways. anyways. You just got to get the right parts to be able to make it work and know how to program it. And there's probably a lot of pretty smart guys that don't like the regime inside Russia that are willing to do something like that. So that's a possibility. I don't know.
And the other kind of curiosity thing I heard recently was apparently somebody in the administration came out and said, "Hey, we made an accounting error, and the stuff that we've sent to Ukraine is actually like $3 billion less than what we originally thought. So here we have an extra $3 billion of essential money and stuff to send more stuff there." And the very obvious criticism of that is you are full of shit. You're not making mistakes, that you just want an end around to send more equipment to Ukraine. Have you heard about that accounting error, and what are your thoughts? Did they really make an accounting error, or is it an end around to try and get more equipment moved without congressional approval?
Yeah, when you consider how much stuff we've been sending, keeping track of all that, plus the fact you have to work in, what's the accountant's term? I can't remember, but the devaluation of assets.
Depreciation.
Depreciation of the stuff that we're sending, because much of it is older, used, now put into, mothball, basically, equipment that we're sending them. So it has less value than a brand new one. So perfect example is if we're sending them, let's say, M1A1 tanks, and we're charging them as if they're M1A2 tanks, there's a significant difference in cost for that. So you could easily come up with an accounting error. $3 billion? I don't know. That seems like a hell of a lot of money to me, but who am I?
Well, I mean, we do spend 700 plus $800 billion a year on military equipment. I guess,
yeah.
I guess $3 billion in the grand scheme of things is pretty small.
Yeah. I suspect it's a combination of, yes, there probably were accounting errors, and at the same time, it's kind of like cooking the books, as many businesses do, to make things work out in your favor one way or the other. It's not necessarily illegal, but it's a little questionable.
It's just a little creative financing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, nobody's going to go to jail for it, but you might get hit with a fine.
I did find it highly sus. I have to admit, I heard that number come out, and I was just like, that doesn't make a lot. I do think there are a lot of, because the other problem is too. Okay, so when they originally talked about the cost of supplying all this to Ukraine, there was a lot I think they didn't include in the original. For example, also deducting the cost of maintaining this equipment and housing it and doing all that other stuff, which now that it's older equipment, we didn't want or weren't necessarily going to use anyway. So now we don't have to maintain it. We don't have to. It's like if you don't deduct that from the cost initially, so it's when you're saying how much is this costing the U.S., that's a very hard figure to calculate, and how deep you want to go. I buy that there were accounting errors, that it ended up being quite that
well,
much.
It goes
suspect.
The other way too. If you buy an F-22 or an F-35 from General Dynamics or Grumman or whoever, I don't know who makes them. Anyway, if you buy them, it's the same thing. They're huge, pricey items, and you never really get an actual, this cost $143 million and 23 cents. It's always, it's about 100 million, okay, per copy. So, okay, great. And then, we work out the details over time. Well, we had to give you the special tires, and that costs a little more, and you got the tow package, so
Well, and they also, I think, don't usually
don't forget the undercoating. Everybody needs undercoating.
Don't forget the launch hook and the recovery hook, or the launch landing gear and the recovery hook. Yeah, I know we're not sending these to the Navy, and we don't really plan on launching them off of aircraft carriers. But hey, these are
you might. Yeah, you never know.
Need that capability. I guess the thing that I kind of always wonder about is like when I hear about accounting errors, it always seems to be an accounting error in the favor of whoever's reporting it. Never seems to go the other way. Like, oh crap, we actually spent $3 billion more than we were authorized to send this equipment over there. It's like you almost never hear that.
No.
So a couple of other questions.
Point out two other things that have gone on this week that I think we need to at least broach.
Before we do that, once again, and there's been a little confusion. There always is. These shows kind of suck for that reason. Not the Starsky ones, but the ones where we're simulcasting. As you guys know, we split the channel. The more evergreen content where we're sitting around, talking not necessarily current events, but other topics on education, philosophy, science, psychology, whatever. That is now all on overtime. We need to get overtime to 1,000 subs. We need to do it. The sooner that happens, the easier life gets for everybody. So we are simulcasting this. We're asking everybody who's seeing it on overtime, go to on in time, to go to our sister channel, go to overtime. Subscribe there. We are 80 subs short, so 80 more subs. That's done. We've been kind of dialing back the simulcasting. Nobody likes doing it. So, but if we can get that 80, it just makes our lives a lot better. So I'm hoping everyone can take a minute, go over, do that. It would really help out if we can get to 100. We're 80 short. I think we can do it, but we really need everybody's help with that. So having, and subs are free, that was point exactly. So it's a great, easy, free way to help out the channel. So yes, you had a couple other things that you were going to say.
I had a phone call coming in.
Oh.
Never mind. My wife took it. So the two things, both indirectly have to do with Turkey, I suppose. Number one is the question of when is Sweden going to be allowed in? And apparently the Finns made some kind of veiled, nasty comment about the Turks, being obstructionist to that thing. Basically, how long is it going to take before you pull your heads out of your collective butts and let the Swedes join? Which I thought was a nice thing to say.
So just to get everybody, and I assume probably most of our audience already knows, but basically Sweden is one vote short of being able to join NATO. It has to be unanimous, and Turkey is holding out. And they've been holding out for a while, so that's the biggie. Is that right?
Yeah. And there's a lot of debate over why they're holding out. There was speculation at one point that it was because the U.S. had offered to give Greece some updated aircraft. I can't remember the details anymore. We were going to sell them, I don't know, F-22s or something. But we weren't going to let the Turks get access to the F-22. We'd only give them more F-16s. They were very upset about this. So it's like, well, we're going to teach you a lesson. We'll stop Sweden from joining. That's part of it. The other part, apparently, is that there's a little jealousy over the fact that Sweden's coming in. Because Sweden's a pretty big and important industrial power, and Turkey liked the fact that they were important in NATO and they were bigger than let's say the Italians and the Portuguese and the Spanish and the Dutch. And, we're kind of the mid-sized fighter on the block, and it's very obvious that if Sweden comes in, their place in the pecking order is going to be above the Turks, and there's some speculation that they're a little upset that I'm no longer the number 6 guy on the block. I'm now number 7. And it's silly, but that's part of it. And it's also because Erdogan can use this as a bargaining chip for whatever he wants to try to compel everybody to do nice things for him, not necessarily for Turkey, him personally, I'll bet, knowing the man. So that's part of what I think may be going on as well. But yeah, it was surprising to me that they were willing to say, okay, Finland can join, but not Sweden. When you would have thought it was kind of the other way around, because Finland has a common border with the Russians, whereas Sweden doesn't. So,
yeah, I was well, and it's like, who hates on Sweden? Really, I did not see this coming. You think it's actually? Do you think ultimately it's going to go through?
I think, yeah, eventually it will go through. I mean, the benefits to everybody are so big by having that country join the alliance, and I think there are ways to kind of to nerf the Turkish obstructionism. They just haven't wanted to deploy it. Everybody's trying to play nice and let the Turkish election cycle play itself out without foreign influence. You know, we don't want to be the Russians doing to the United States with what we're going to be or potentially could do with the Turks. That's kind of what I think may be part of what's going on.
All right, so I think you said that there was two things that you wanted to mention. So one is I think NATO and the holdup with Sweden. What was the other?
The other's the whole question of F-16s, and I know there was a whole big thing a week or two ago about, oh yeah, the U.S. has said we won't object to other countries giving F-16s to the Ukrainians. And that would be a big deal if we were able to get F-16s to Ukraine. But the real question is, how long would it take for those things to become operational? And we're starting to get noises coming out of the five-sided funny farm that, yeah, this isn't as easy as we think or everybody thinks. So they're basically saying, yeah, F-16s will go to Ukraine eventually. They will become operational, but it's a lot more complicated than we think. And I don't think this is people holding back. I think, as I've mentioned before, they're starting to realize that the logistical infrastructure to make F-16s operational in Ukraine is a much bigger hurdle than anybody initially realized. So once that hurdle has been overcome, then yeah, I can easily see, I won't say overnight, but in a fairly short period, the Ukrainian Air Force completely re-equipping with F-16s from all the ones that people were promising them.
Would that be sufficient to give them air superiority? If so, how significant would that be? If not, why not?
It would be important, but it's also a matter of training, doctrine, and integration of the aircraft into a much larger, air defense, air superiority system. So just having an airplane that you can fly is one thing, but if you aren't using it to its full capabilities because you don't have the communications network, you don't have the radar network to provide the aircraft the direction it needs to get where it's going, that kind of stuff, that makes it far less effective. Once you get all that in place, yeah, these will become very potent assets for the Ukrainians. But until then, it's just, I don't think it gives them significant advantage over what they already have with the Russian-made aircraft that they're operating. That said, the F-16 does have the ability to carry certain pieces of ordnance which are much more problematic for them to use on their Russian platforms. Those are very important. So high quality, longer range air-to-air missiles anti-radiation missiles used for both mapping out and suppressing enemy air defenses. A lot of people don't realize that's one of the things you can do with a HARM missile is you don't shoot it. You just turn it on and you fly around and you record the data that it's getting, and it says, oh, I see that radar over there. I see that radar over there.
Interesting.
I see that radar over there. And then you can take it back, and your intel section can go through it all and say, okay, this is where all the Russian radars are for their air defense grids. Now we can go take them out en masse. So that's useful. It gives them access to JDAMs. We know they have JDAMs. We know they've been using them, but the interface, I suspect, is a lot less robust with the ones that they've kind of kludged together to use off of Russian aircraft. So getting an F-16 that is fully integrated for using the things is important, because you can switch targeting in flight, which is really difficult to do if you don't have the right computers and everything actually built into the plane to reprogram the weapon. That kind of stuff. So yeah, that will all together give them some big advantages.
So I do want to talk about, I heard Russia blew up one of its own bridges to try to slow down any possible invasion from the Ukrainian side, which I thought was interesting. So there's a couple of questions I want to ask. I'm going to sort of preview them so that you can think about them, including if and when is NATO going to say gloves are off, you can go in. There's been a lot of talk from a number of countries, even France, where Macron previously had been best buddies with Putin, like, this is a big misunderstanding, is saying, look, it's internationally recognized that you can hit inside another country's borders if you've been invaded by that country. It's part of acting in self-defense. So there seems to be a push for that. So I want to talk about that, and I think that's very important. But before we do, Starsky, we had asked Starsky a while back about how long he thought this was going to last, and he said it was in his view, it was not going to end this year. He said that last year, so he said it's not going to end in 2003, but go into 2004. You concurred, and now you've said you think even possibly into 2005. And I got to tell you, as somebody, and I don't know, I'm curious if Xandering feels this way too, which is I look at it and we're looking at this offensive, which, the hopes are it's going to do better than the last one, which was amazing. Russia's down to 16% of Ukraine under their control from a high of, I think it was 23, 24%, very near Kyiv. And here they are just getting pushed back. General Hodges said that if Ukraine wanted to, they could probably, and if they were fully supported by NATO, they could probably get Crimea back by the end of August. Now, it doesn't look like necessarily they've been doing everything towards that end. We've discussed why they may or may not want to, but given all of that, it's always amazing to me, but now keep in mind, last year this time, I was like, 3 or 4 months, and you're like, no, a year at least. I was like, no, 3 or 4 months, please tell me 3 or 4. Why does it take so long? If there's so much progress, at least it looks to be, it feels just an emotional response. Again, I don't know if Xandering is going to concur with me on this or not, but it feels like, wow, we should be seeing the light at the end of the tunnel if there's this major offensive, and it never seems to be the case. Why is
History
that?
is replete with home before the leaves fall, home before Christmas, home before Easter. But when you go to war, the generals and the politicians want to put a good spin on things. So they always announce very optimistic projections of what's going to occur. And things rarely work out that way. The famous phrase, no plan survives contact with the enemy. So that's part of it. The reverse is also true. The Germans never expected in 1940, when they attacked France, that the war would be over and the French would have surrendered in 6 weeks. They fully anticipated at least 6 months to a year if not longer, to do what they accomplished. So yeah, making predictions it's rolling dice is what it is. It's random. And that includes anything else, including what I say.
Well, I mean, after the last 20 years of conflict in the Middle East, the United States and the United States people should kind of be aware of, this isn't going to be wrapped up, most likely, when they say it's going to be wrapped up.
Yeah.
Although that does kind of tie into a question that I did have about the war just dragging on. Have you changed your stance any on possibly other countries entering the war on Ukraine's behalf? Not necessarily, with the backing of NATO, but say possibly Poland or something coming in and officially joining the war against Russia if this continues.
And I can't tell you specifically. I'll cite one case, and this goes back into 1974. And I need to preface it by some comments about how NATO works. Many nations get monetary support from the deep pockets members of NATO to have their forces and maintain those forces as part of the alliance. Because of that, technically speaking, those forces are allocated towards a NATO defense mission. And the host nation cannot commit those forces without NATO approval. Now, this became important in 1974 because that was when the war in Cyprus occurred. There had been previous conflicts in Cyprus between the Greeks and the Turks. And I can't remember which year it is. I think it's 68 or 69. There's a big one. And the Turks actually mobilized their forces, and they're getting ready to transport them over to the island to fight on behalf of the Turkish minority population on Cyprus. And NATO comes out and says, you can't do that. And what do you mean? These are our soldiers. You can't tell us. Yeah, we can. The stipend means these are allocated to a NATO mission. You cannot send these troops into action without NATO approval. So in between the 1960 tension and the one in 74, the Turks built an entire separate new corps. And that corps was financed exclusively with Turkish funds. It did not have a NATO mission. Doesn't mean that if war broke out between NATO and Russia, these Turks wouldn't have been sent to the front to fight with the rest of the Turks, but these guys weren't, restricted by that cause. And those are the troops that actually conducted the invasion of Cyprus in 1974. So that's the important element to take away from this, is that other NATO members can't really send their troops to help Ukraine unless they've done that bookkeeping trick that the Turks did. And you have forces that you've consciously excluded from NATO support in a NATO mission. So I don't know what the former Eastern Bloc countries did after the wall came down. They may have read their history and their current news and said, maybe we should do something like the Turks and have some of our forces specifically allocated to non-NATO mission. So in that case, yeah, you could get, let's say, if the Poles had done that and had a brigade of troops, they could send those troops to fight in Ukraine. And technically, that would mean Poland alone was joining the Russo-Ukrainian war, and it would not bring NATO in. Now, I say technically because how do you think the Russians are going to view that incident if it occurs?
Oh, that NATO's invading.
Yeah, exactly, because they're not looking at legal niceties. They're just looking at the fact that yesterday there weren't any Polish soldiers in Ukraine. Today there are. Something's going on.
Well, and
and
even
I'm
if they,
sure for their own propaganda reasons. I mean, even if they were fully aware of exactly what had happened, I mean, that's
Exactly.
a prime
Yeah,
propaganda piece. Oh, we're being invaded by by NATO. They've entered the war, and they can use that for so many excuses to do whatever it is that they want to do. I was just curious if this keeps grinding on and just keeps going, and it's just like, okay, we don't really see kind of an end to this. Or, I mean, is NATO willing to let it go on like the U.S. was willing to go on in Afghanistan or the Middle East for the next 20 years? Or, are they going to try and do something to try and end this?
Well, I mean, this gets into the whole question of war termination theory. And it's really tough. I mean, short of an outright victory, one side capitulating or being overrun and conquered, it means you have to go to the negotiating table. And for that to work, both sides have to want to end the war. They both have to come out of it seeing whatever the negotiated settlement is as not what they wanted, but what they would concede to agree to end the fighting. So as long as Zelensky is insistent that, no, this is my list of demands, and until these are met, the war goes on. Same thing with Putin, until I conquer Ukraine, the war goes on. Eventually, it's not just a question of one side has to want to go to the negotiating. Both sides have to do it. You have to have a mutual agreement that the suffering is too much. We need to stop it.
I want to stick on this for a minute, because this is one of those that sounds really intuitive and sounds like, well, gee, of course. And it's like, no, you need to understand. And it's buy low, sell high. I love that phrase, buy low, sell high. If you could really do that easily, if people could stick
We'd
to
all be
that.
millionaires.
Yeah. But whenever the market crashes, everybody calls up their broker and is just like, sell, sell, sell. No, the prices are going down. This is actually, believe it or not, when you want to buy. Are you crazy? The market's going down. I'm going to sell. Get out. It's like, so, our instincts override what we really, buy low, sell high, 4 words, almost nobody can follow. I think we think of the way you framed just now how to get out of a war. I remember the first time you framed it, and I remember sitting and thinking about it, and it's a little problematic because we don't want to think of it in these terms, but it sort of reduces it to its simplest terms. And it's like we see it as, I think, almost more complicated than it really is. So what you're saying, if I understand correctly, is both sides, first of all, it's not just one side, but both sides have to have reached a conclusion that the cost of continuing the war isn't worth it for one reason or another. And they both have to reach this conclusion, and then they have to negotiate what they're willing to give up or
so if you're winning, you don't want to stop.
Exactly.
You want to continue fighting because you're going to get more at the negotiating table. Conversely, if you're losing, you want to stop so you don't lose any more, but the other side isn't willing to give in. And that goes back and forth until both sides are at an impasse, and that's when negotiation is actually possible.
So the only 2 ways out of a war, if I understand correctly, is one side obliterates the other one, or 2, both sides have been losing for long enough that they decide it's worth whatever the cost is in face in terms of whatever they have to give, that they're willing to negotiate a way out. Those are the only 2 ways out.
Correct.
All right. So what we're talking about,
there is a third way, but it's more of a joke than an actual one, and that's that you simply forget that you were at war.
Yeah. Well, we've North Korea. We've North and South Korea.
It's not just that there were countries, I can't remember which ones, but they had declared war on the Axis towards the end of World War II, and then promptly forgot to say that they would accept the armistice, that ended the war. So, and then somebody was looking through the history and goes, oh shit, we're still at war in 1983 with Germany. I didn't know that.
Well, so now this is what makes it difficult, because I think it's very hard to choke down the idea that Ukraine would have to negotiate with anybody over anything, that really the obviously moral, ethical, and yes, those are two different things. The most moral, ethical thing that we could imagine is Ukraine gets all its land back and Russia makes some form of reparations. Obviously, they're not going to pay the whole thing because, hey, it's Russia. And, I could see maybe negotiating there, saying, okay, we'll look the other way and pretend like we're going to pay it off. But, and then you stop the war. But that doesn't necessarily seem realistic. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement.
So and we've talked about this before. Personally, I just find that very difficult to even think about, and I'm not the guy being attacked. So obviously,
I would argue, look at Vietnam. That's perfect case in point in a lot of ways. The Vietnamese, the communists, had been just dying in droves. I mean, it was an extremely costly war from the North and from the VC, the Southern Communist elements. From their perspective, they'd lost huge numbers of people,
like 10-1, if I recall.
Oh, well, probably more than that, but yeah, it was just very, very disproportionate. So they wanted the war to end as soon as they could. But they wanted to achieve their goal, which was unifying the country. Conversely, the United States just wanted to end it to stop all the political upheaval at home, because continuing it was costing huge amounts of money, costing lives. I know we in the U.S. think it was, huge casualties. I'm sorry, 58,000 casualties is chump change in a real war situation.
Yeah.
Particularly when it's spread out over 12 years or whatever that we were actually fighting there. Anyway, my point is, we wanted the war to end for political reasons. They wanted the war to end because of the bloodletting. And so we go to Paris and we try to negotiate with them. And things would bog down. We're going to argue over, should we have a square table or should we have a circular table? Bullshit like that. And it was important because both sides were hoping that they could drag the conflict on long enough that the other side would simply cave in, because both sides knew that the other was having difficulty continuing the struggle. And the Vietnamese were on the verge of walking out and just saying, the hell with it, we're going to continue the war regardless, because we see no reason to negotiate since you're not going to do so in good faith. And the U.S. stepped up the strategic bombing campaign again. And at that moment, I mean, it's an overstatement, but technically it's not too far off the truth. As they're walking out the door, the Vietnamese delegation turns around and comes back to the negotiating table because of the destruction of civilian infrastructure in North Vietnam. And, it was like, we cannot continue to do this. Our people are, just not able to tolerate this. The party is starting to lose the support of the people for this reunification process. We need to negotiate and get some kind of a deal. So they very cannily figure out we can give the Americans what they want, while at the same time giving ourselves the opening to get what we want, which is, you guys go ahead and leave, give these vague security promises for South Vietnam. Try that in English this time. You give security promises to South Vietnam, and you leave, and we promise not to, interfere with South Vietnam, and we'll let the country stand, and we'll remain a divided country. So the U.S. leaves, and within about a year, North Vietnam mounts this enormous conventional, not unconventional, not guerrillas, a conventional military invasion of the South that ends the war basically in about a year and a half.
So if we apply this to Ukraine, and I think Xandering maybe was going to. Xandering, did you want to say something? Or
I kind of like the renaming of Vietnam to Vietnamon.
Vietnam.
Bite me, dude.
All right. So if we apply
At
this,
least you didn't. Sorry, I was gonna say at least you didn't confuse the dates and say 2003, 2004, and 2005 like Nick did.
Yes, I didn't want to correct him and embarrass him. So.
Oh, I'm totally up for that.
Yeah.
Don't. I won't. I won't pass that up.
I'm still in neutral, so you'll have to forgive me. Of course, but around here we call that Tuesday. So if we are talking about, if we apply this to Ukraine, Putin can keep going essentially forever. He's a dictator. He doesn't have to get elected. There's no political, his only concern is that enough people that he's really beholden to, which would be the oligarchs, get pissed off enough that they try to find some other way of removing him, either through an open window or, however they decide to do that. So he can essentially keep going forever, and he can keep sending as many he's scraping the bottom of the barrel, but it doesn't cost him anything. Even if Ukraine gets back all its territory, he can keep just throwing missiles, drones, whatever he wants, as long as he wants. So it sounds like getting him to the negotiating table. So first of all, unless, and I think General Hodges and a few others have mentioned this, we're going to take the Ukrainian army marching through Moscow off the table. But so we've talked about two ways to end the war. That would be the first one. Ukraine literally conquers Russia. We're going to take that off the table. So the next one is finding a way to get them to the table, to the negotiating table. And so you've got this problem of, okay, Ukraine, let's assume Ukraine gets back all its territory. Is there much incentive for Putin to stop and to negotiate, and what happens then?
I don't think there's incentive for him. He just keeps going and hopes that Ukraine's will caves and that he gets what he wants. I mean, Ukraine is a democratic country, and they will hold elections at some point. And just like we had in the Civil War, you might have a candidate that ran against Lincoln who his promise was, we're going to end the war. We're going to let the Confederacy be its own independent country and leave it at that. So, in theory, you might get somebody in Ukraine that runs against Zelensky and says the same kind of message as, we're just going to end the war. We've suffered too much. We'll let them keep Crimea and the Donbass. And if he wins, then the Russians get what they want. Conversely, you could have the Ukrainians pull kind of the same switcheroo that the Vietnamese did, where you say, okay, we'll negotiate a settlement. You get out, you give us back Crimea and declare that the Donbass is an independent country. They can be your friends, but they're independent. You don't own them. You renounce your incorporation of them back into the Russian fold and everything. And then 2-3 years from now, Ukraine special forces go in and engineer a coup, and suddenly, oh no, we always wanted to be part of Ukraine, and they go back in. And at that point, either Putin's off the stage or is in such a condition politically that he can't afford to go back to war over this. And so he does like what we did with the South Vietnamese. We just turn a blind eye and go, what? So you say somebody was being invaded? I didn't know. Huh. Anyway, back to what we were talking about, the oil prices, where you're all getting tons of money back now. That kind of twitcheroo.
So where do you see, we know this offensive is coming up. Ukraine now has regained all but about 16% of its land. Getting Crimea back has to be a significant goal for them, but having said that, they know that Russia knows it's a goal for them, and they've been anything but predictable, so that doesn't mean they're going to go for it. What do you see? And this is, so I remember like one of the first times you ever streamed with us, and you said, you know, I'm going to take it a little easy on the speculation because it's all speculation, and I don't know. I was like, great. I just for that, I made sure to ask you to speculate on every show you're on, even if we're not talking about Ukraine. I'm like, could you speculate? You know, will there be a
and I
Fast and
expect your
Furious,
audience to studiously study and note down every speculation I made and then call me on it, you know, months later. In April you said
You
this.
said
Here we
exactly.
are in October, and it's actually this. You're wrong. I can't trust you.
That's the real reason. That's the real reason we record all these shows, is so that we can just go back.
I thought so. I thought so.
They're going to do this major offensive. They're at about, I think it was 16% of their land is still in.
Let's stop on that statement.
Yes.
16% of land. I'm really curious to know, does that include Crimea and the Donbass?
I suspect it does not. I suspect it includes Donbass. I've seen that number several places, and I have not seen how that number was constructed. My suspicion is it includes Donbass, but it's assuming the war started when the invasion came from Crimea into Ukraine. So it's assuming that the war started, over a year ago as opposed to in 2014, which is a very that's one hell of an assumption.
And I'd really love to know exactly what that number's based on, because my sense is that Russia made some fairly significant gains early in the war, and then lost almost all of those gains when the Kharkiv and Kherson offensives regained all that ground. I think the 16% refers to that territory that they gained at the start of this war, not prior to that. So it's taking Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea and treating them as, so to speak, semi-separate entities. They're not part of that. That's my sense of the whole thing.
So I guess my sort of final two questions are, one, where do you think this is, let me rephrase this. Ideally, let's assume that you're looking at this, you have some idea of realistically what's possible. So in your view, if this was to go really well for Ukraine, if they were to do a good job and not have any terribly unforeseen hiccups, which is not likely, there's always hiccups, what would you like to see achieved in the next few months during this latest round of sort of major combat operations? So what would you like to see by the end of fall coming up? And at what point, if any, do you think NATO and the U.S. is going to take the gloves off and say, yeah, you guys can do whatever you want with these weapons, including go into Russia? Do you think that that's a good idea?
Okay. So what I would like to see, I'm not saying this is what would happen, but what I would like to see by, let's say, the end of the year, is that the land connection between Russian territory and Crimea is severed. So the only direct communication they have is either by sea or across the Kerch Strait Bridge. And I suspect that the moment the land bridge is severed, the bridge gets taken out with ordnance. So that's cut too. So Crimea effectively becomes an island, and trying to support that island by sea becomes very difficult for the Russians. I'd love to see that happen, and I think it is within the Ukrainian military's capability to achieve that. The trouble is, at what cost? Because the Russians have to know that's probably one of their key goals for this coming year. This coming year, here we are in June, halfway through the year.
Yeah.
But that's what I think, or I'm hoping, will happen during the summer campaigning season, so to speak. Will the Russians be moved by that? Yes, but how much is a completely different question. And I think at that point, Putin really and his cronies are going to have to really take a step back and say, the next step is Crimea is going to fall because we have no way of supporting a realistic defense of the peninsula.
Yeah.
So once that goes, then all you're left with is Donetsk and Luhansk. And that's a completely separate campaign that I don't see is going to be an easy one. There's no obvious ways to cut that off, to cut the supplies, because it butts up, along hundreds of miles against the Russian frontier. So getting supplies into support forces defending those areas is very simple. So I don't know if that's something that they can achieve at a reasonable cost outside of a negotiation. So I think what everybody's hoping is that losing, or at least threatening to lose, Crimea will be enough to force the Russians to tacitly admit, okay, now's the time to say, okay, we'll talk to you. We'll figure out some arrangement and everybody will be happy.
Ish.
Which really means, which really means everybody's going to be unhappy when it's over.
Well, that's my father always used to say that of what the whole point of going to court was to, and judges recognize this and recognize this as their job, was to make sure that both sides walked away unhappy. So from the beginning, the U.S. has been no attacks in Russia. There have been now some attacks in Russia. They've been minor, but we know they have been coming from the Ukrainian army. We know there's other attacks that we don't know where they're coming from, or from the freedom of Russia, and the other one who's, I've forgotten their name. But at any rate, so there are some attacks going into Russia now. Yeah. There's increasing calls for just saying gloves off. Ukraine can do what they want. One, should that have been the policy from the start? Two, should that be the policy going forward? And if so, starting at what point? And what point do you expect that to happen, if you think it's going to?
Think of the analogy of cooking a lobster. You don't lob the lobster into boiling water. You put them in cold water and slowly turn up the heat. So that's kind of what we're doing, so to speak, with Russia with regards to how far we're allowed to push things. Because if we threw that lobster, being Putin, into that pot of boiling water right off, he's going to do crazy things to try to get out of the pot. Mm-hmm. And we all know where that leads in this particular scenario. But over this past year and a half, he's watched his military gradually being whittled away to the point of collapse. And he has to be coming to a realization that his original goals are not remotely achievable. So at this point, saying, yeah, the gloves can come off to some extent. You can start hitting valid military targets inside Russian territory is a possibility that I think Biden and the other Western heads of state may, I won't say agree to, but accede to. They'll allow themselves to be pressured into saying yes.
If that happens, do you think Ukraine is going to start major strikes in Russia? And if so, do you think it's going to have any impact?
Again, major strikes really implies hitting civilian infrastructure, terror bombing. And I think the Ukrainians are smart enough to understand that is contraindicated in this situation. The moment you start getting Russian hospitals and schools getting blown up by Ukrainian bombs, a lot of the support that they enjoy in the West dries up that fast. So they, as long as they're striking military airfields, industrial plants that produce drones or tanks or something like that, people will kind of turn a blind eye to what's going on. Yeah, occasionally a weapon will go off target and, you'll get collateral damage, as the U.S. military loves to call it. And people understand that happens. It's the nature of war. But it's different than what the Russians are doing in Ukraine right now. The collateral damage is actually the deliberate intent of what they're doing.
Yeah. All right, so $2 from Sinister Porpoise. Isn't dry dock the safest place for Russian ships? Thank you, Sinister, for the super chat. We're gonna all super chats on these any Starsky
if you knock
show.
The ship off of its, the
Blocking.
the blocking, and it falls over, then it's actually worse for the ship. So maybe you leave it in very shallow water, a nice sandy bottom, and the crew doesn't stay on it, and it just slowly rusts away there on the shore. That's the safest place for a ship.
And we had somebody bring this up. Yeah, we are aware. I guess there's in Kyiv there's some significant air raid sirens going on, and they're yeah. So we're going to look at that. Come check us out on the Discord. We follow that and everything else pertaining not only to the war but U.S. politics, Trump, the whole 9 yards. Also channels on gaming, philosophy, psychology, whatever you're interested in. So I hope you guys will check us out. I've noticed a number of you have gone to Overtime and subscribed. We are so close on Overtime, so if you can do that, then we don't ever have to shill for that again. We're pretty close, so we just need a few more subs, and then that gets to 1,000. So we really appreciate it. We are coming up on a hard stop pretty soon, so we're going to need to get going. Xandering, did you have any final questions before we head out?
Oh, sure. Give me the hard stop and say, oh, you have a final question, but you only got like 30 seconds.
Thank you very much for that, Xandering, and thank you all for joining us. And we're gonna see you all next week. We got a little more time.
Real quick,
yeah.
Let's see how long it takes you to answer this one. Tinfoil hat time. I'm guesstimating 1.5 rolls of tinfoil for this particular theory or hypothesis. China decides to get a little froggy, and they're going to take Taiwan back, close down shipping through the South China Sea, and patrol the Strait of Malacca to stop, to interdict any kind of shipping that they don't want, and take control of the whole area, and reach out an olive branch to Russia and say, hey, we will ally with you, and we will support you in your war against Ukraine and taking over Ukraine if you'll support us against the obvious response of the U.S. military, drawing the U.S. into a potential hot war, maybe not declared war, but hot confrontation with China over shipping rights, and a renewed push into Ukraine with the support of China and this drags the rest of NATO into the war, and we end up in World War III. Likely or no?
No, I don't think so. It's not what we would be discussing here. I will simply say we should do a separate show on this, of why I think a Chinese attack on Taiwan is contraindicated. I don't think the utility of doing such an attack gives them any benefit, results in a lot of very negative things about them, or happening to them by doing so. And perhaps most importantly, Taiwan, for the central government, ever since the CPP took over, has been this great bellwether for manipulating public opinion. anytime you start getting pushback from a population that's not happy with the direction that the central government is taking things, the central government is able to grab the Taiwan banner and wave it furiously, and suddenly all public dissent disappears because we must be behind the emperor or the central government or whatever it is. Do what they tell us to natural fervor. But attacking it, just it doesn't yield them anything, and actually does a lot of very negative stuff to them. So they will demonstrate, but I don't think they will actually attack. But again, that's a topic for a completely separate show.
So save your tinfoil for the mothership. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Or for me, he always puts that, because we're not going to get into it. He just likes to, every time he puts the tinfoil hat on. We have had a request, and I think we have to do this.
Twice.
That counts as every time. I'm offended.
Okay.
We've had a significant number of requests for a pooch. So I'm hoping that before we go, we're on our last minutes here, but before we go, maybe you can indulge our audience with. I think at this point, I don't think.
No. This is a standard case of let sleeping dogs lie.
Probably was.
The moment I summon them, everybody will get agitated, and we'll probably have another angry bark fest. So at this point, I'm just going to. Oh, here comes somebody moving, so I will see if I can get him to participate. Zuko, come here. Zuko, come here. Here. Okay. Up.
Oh, there he is.
Up.
There he is.
Up.
There's
The true stars of the show.
Oh,
yeah.
There's your
Oh. Let me.
Sadly, the really cute one, the girl, you'll never see a rupture. Her hips don't allow her to really do things like this. So I'll just have to.
I heard that.
I'm going to move the camera just so everybody can see Little Miss Princess.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Yeah, I know.
That's my 𝐒𝐴𝐿𝐴.
𝐒𝐴𝐿𝐴. I love that. Hey, I'm gonna go back. I retired my wiener. I'm sure you'll all be happy to know that I have retired my wiener to my mom's house. But I'm gonna stop by one of these days, and I'm gonna get my little wiener, and you're all gonna get to see my wiener live on stream.
We're gonna have to make a new show, OnlyFans time. Although that's the only reason you want to get one of those dogs, is because that way you can go around to people and talk about you're so. Well, I was gonna
did that a lot. I would walk around and I would ask people, "Would you like to stroke my wiener?" And I would hold my wiener out.
Dear Lord. Okay, well, we've just been demonetized. Wait, hold on. That's YouTube. We have been preemptively demonetized on overtime. We weren't even monetized on overtime, and they struck us. Okay. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Which side are you on? Thank you all for joining us. Join us on the Discord. Commander McMillan is there. He's really great about answering questions. We're going to be keeping up with all this. We are expecting things to heat up again. Once again, we're sorry we weren't able to bring Starsky. He apologizes for not being able to make it. He was really good about it, but it's like he's always so effusive. He's just like, I'm so sorry, and we'll find a way to make it up. I was like, just stay alive. Do me a favor, stay alive. Right, I'm gonna mute you, Lance. There we go. So, oh my God, there he is. But I'll also white box that while we've got the cutie pie up there. One last call, anybody, and if you're watching this after the fact, if this is we've already been live, it's a couple days later, I'm sure we could still use the subs on overtime. We've had a number of people join on overtime. That has really helped us out. Nobody likes asking for it. Nobody likes doing these simulcasts, but it's just one of those. YouTube makes a number of demands of creators, and realistically, getting that one monetized is going to be one of them. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. We're going to have on Irish Swede. He's going to be back to discuss U.S. economics, economic policy, the debt. Is it sustainable? Talk about U.S. as the world reserve currency, and all of that stuff. I think that's going to be a great show on Tuesday. A couple of other good shows planned, so hope you will join us for that, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a good afternoon, all. Thank you so much for joining us.